Welcome to Integrity Over Scale podcast. My name is Leili. Let's get started. Welcome to Integrity Over Scale podcast. My name is Leili. I'm looking at myself and I'm thinking, oh my God, here we go. Another podcast. I swear. So I have big plans with the way this is structured. So you can see like maybe a better background behind me. I just want to make sure that I get an episode out and give as many resources as I possibly can. So hopefully the next solo episode that you have with me, there's just nicer things to look at in the background. But for now, you are stuck in my office with me because I don't want to keep you from getting a podcast from me. So today we're talking about a topic that is, all in all, to be quite honest with you, it sounds very simple, but it gets very complicated. And it has to do with authenticity in leadership. So what I want to do is really think about what we've talked about so far in this podcast. You've spent some time with me talking about hubrism, talking about dark side of leadership, bad side of leadership. We've gone into gender leadership, what women are facing in today's world. And now I really want to talk and gear us to what it actually looks like to lead with authenticity in a way that's grounded, ethical, and effective. Now, the good news is, great place to start from an authentic piece is to be yourself. Usually when I say this to clients, or any coach that says this to a client, to be your most authentic self and to be you, the reaction usually is, what? What are you talking about? Like, of course I'm going to be myself. But it's amazing how much we mask given different places, situations that we're in. The promise of authentic leadership sounds simple in theory, to be who you are and be true to yourself. And it's very attractive to be yourself and tell the truth, lead from your values and so forth. We spent a great deal of time talking about what authenticity looks like. What's good leadership looking like? We spend very little time talking about what bad looks like. Because in practice, when authenticity gets misused, it comes off as bad leadership. So if we don't understand the dark side, we will never understand what good looks like. People use the word authentic to justify bluntness, rigidness, or refusal to grow. It's bizarre to me. It's none of those things. So today we're going to pull apart this word and answer a specific question, that is, how do you show up as your real self without hiding behind all of these different masks that you and I have in the world, in different contexts, right? Without hiding behind, that's just who I am, when your behavior could actually hurt people depending on the mask that you put on. So that is the heart of our conversation. Now, what authentic leadership actually is and is not. Let's start by getting clear on the theory. So in research, authentic leadership is not just saying whatever is on your mind. It is a specific way of leading, and it's built on 4 core elements. The first one being my favorite, which is self-awareness. You have a realistic understanding of your strengths, limits, triggers, and values. Okay. The second piece is relational transparency. That means you are appropriately open and honest with others. People don't feel like they're dealing with a mask version that we talked about. The third is balanced processing of information. So this means you are willing to look at multiple perspectives, and this includes people who challenge you before you decide something. I was actually on a call with a client, an old client of mine, and she was talking to me about how one of the new contractors that they brought on board was questioning a process, just being there for like a week, and it was driving her crazy. But she was kind enough to catch herself, the self-awareness, and then realize that maybe this challenge, even though it's a week in, she can take into consideration and think about the way that she does things in her process. Now, lastly, internalized moral perspective. Your decisions are guided by your values and ethical standards, not just by external pressures or convenience. This is a piece where I see a lot of leaders struggling because they haven't had the time to sit and think about what are your top 5 values. I don't like saying things that I don't practice myself. So here are my values. I literally, for those of you who are listening, here's a little bit of ASMR. I have a Post-it that's here to remind me. I put it in my little drawer on my desk that tells me what my values are. My top values are spirituality, entrepreneurship, learning, sincerity, and bravery. Now, to me, these go specific even more. They're more detailed, but this is just my reminder every single day of what my values are. And so that I, from a leadership perspective, practice that not only in vivo leadership strategies, but in the way I lead and the way I do business. So let's walk through the 4 a little bit more besides these generalized versions of what we just talked about. Let's talk about self-awareness. Self-awareness means you are paying attention to what is going on inside you. You can say, I know I tend to get really defensive when someone questions my work, or you say something like, hey, I notice I avoid conflict and I sugarcoat feedback when I talk to my team. So instead of pretending those tendencies are not there, you notice them and you choose how to respond. Now, relational transparency does not mean oversharing every thought and emotion. Relational transparency actually means people have a sense of the real you. They know where you stand. They don't feel like they're dealing with this polished character in a performance all the time. You share your reasoning, you admit when you don't know, and you do not quietly manipulate other people. Then we get to the third one. So balanced processing is the opposite of what we call confirmation bias in leadership. Because instead of only listening to people who agree with you, which is the confirmation bias, I believe in something, you tell me, and I'm like, see, I told you that's how it goes. You're actively seeking out different viewpoints. You're willing to say, tell me what I might be missing, for instance, and you can tolerate the discomfort of hearing that you are wrong or that your idea is incomplete. And an internalized moral perspective means your compass is inside you, not just in the quarterly numbers or the loudest stakeholder. You have done the work to clarify your values, and you're willing to live with the consequences of honoring them, even when it is inconvenient. Now, those 4 elements, they sound straightforward to us. And it can easily go sideways in practice. Remember, in vivo, in my company, we tolerate theory. We love reality, right? Because at the end of the day, if you cannot put this in practice, then that's the problem. A lot of people hear authentic leadership and translate it into, I get to be myself, full stop. They think authenticity means if I'm authentic, I never have to show doubt. I just say whatever I think, whenever I think it. I'm super honest and direct. And if I'm authentic, I don't need to adapt my style to different people or contexts. And my thought is like, okay, so you just gave yourself this free pass to say whatever's on your mind. Those are myths. Those are extremes. So before we go any further, I want you to take a moment and check in with yourself. When you hear the phrase authentic leader, I want you to think about the word that comes to mind. Most people will say things like honest, transparent, consistent, self-aware, genuine. Those are great associations. Now, misconceptions. You may have heard or even felt some things like, I don't have to change my mind. I don't filter. I just say it like it is. I should be the same person in every room that I walk in, no matter who is there. Those sound bold, but they are actually pretty problematic. Authenticity is not a license to stop growing and just say whatever the hell I want to say. It's not an excuse to be insensitive. And it is not a reason to center your comfort over everyone else's experience. So authentic leaders, they're genuine and they're true to their values, and, emphasis on the and, they are flexible and considerate. We have to hold both. So now I want to talk about authenticity paradox, growing without feeling fake. So this brings us to what Herminia Ibarra calls authenticity paradox. And the paradox is this: if you cling to a rigid idea of your real self, this is just who I am as a leader, you can actually block your own growth. You avoid experimenting with new behaviors. Let's start with there, because they feel pretty unfamiliar to you. And you say, hey, that doesn't feel like me. When what you really mean is that feels new and it's uncomfortable for me. So you stay in your comfort zone. And then you call it authenticity. This is the most problem that I see, especially when I watch TikToks and some of the trend topics of what authenticity means. It's a little, I worry about it, because I want you to imagine a leader who says, hey, I'm just not a feedback person. I like to keep things friendly. That person is avoiding hard conversations, for instance, in the name of being themselves. And the impact, their team doesn't get the coaching that they need. Problems fester. People feel confused about expectations. The leader feels authentic, quote unquote, but the leadership isn't effective. So on the flip side, I want you to think about an executive who prides themselves on being brutally honest. And they say something like, I'm just telling the truth. I'm just being real. They use authenticity language to justify harsh, careless, and shaming communication. They may genuinely believe that they're being courageous, but the reality is they are lacking emotional intelligence and empathy. That is the authenticity paradox in real life. The very thing you think makes you authentic can become the thing that makes you less effective and less ethical. Ibarra's point with this is that effective leaders don't cling to a fixed identity. They experiment. They try new behaviors, new ways of communicating, new ways of showing up. This isn't wearing a mask. This is understanding yourself in situations, especially when their context is changing, right? These leaders are willing to feel a little inauthentic temporarily in order to grow into a more expansive, more skillful version of themselves. So if you ever said, that doesn't feel like me, I want you to ask a deeper question. Does it truly violate your values, or is it just unfamiliar to you? If it conflicts with your values, that is completely something important to you. But if it is just a new thing, that discomfort is actually the price of growth. Authentic leadership is not about freezing yourself at a particular moment in time and saying that this is my brand and this is forever my brand. It's about being anchored to your values as you remain open to evolving your style, evolving your skills, and even your story about who you are as a leader. So let's connect this back to hubris for a moment, because dark, you understand dark, you can understand the light. When you look at the literature on authenticity and hubris, you see a common theme. The most effective leaders keep their egos out of the driver's seat. They see leadership as relational, not as a personal spotlight. They're going to recognize that their followers, their teams, their stakeholders are not props in their hero narrative. Authenticity becomes an antidote to hubris, but it's only when it's rooted in humility and not self-importance. So you can think of it this way. Hubris, it says I already am the finished product. Everyone needs to catch up to me. Authentic leadership says, hey, I know who I am. I know my values. I know what I stand for, and I am still learning. And that's the biggest difference, is one thinks that they're done growing and the other one understands the expansion part of growth. So we talked about wearing different masks. Let's talk about being real versus being this mask version of yourself, or maybe a jerk version of yourself. Let's bring this to concrete examples. I want you to imagine two leaders. Leader one is a new manager. They've been promoted within the team, so it's an internal promotion. They really want it to be liked. They also have heard so many messages about bring your whole self to work and don't be a fake leader, that they decided the best way to be authentic is to be one of the gang. They go out to happy hour with their team. They join in on every joke. They share a lot of personal information. They position themselves as a buddy. So on the surface, it feels relaxed and authentic, like, oh, thank God. But because they're trying so hard to be liked, they avoid giving honest feedback. They soften expectations. They back away from hard conversations. When someone is underperforming, they tell themselves, well, I don't want to be mean. I don't want to be that boss. So they say nothing. And then what happens over time? Well, team gets less clarity. High performers start to feel frustrated. The manager feels increasingly stuck between wanting to be liked and knowing things are off track. Their authentic style, being everyone's friend, is actually undermining their responsibility as a leader. Now, leader 2, opposite. This leader describes themselves as tough but fair. They're proud of being direct. If you ask them about their leadership style, they're going to say, hey, I don't sugarcoat, or people always know where they stand with me. When someone makes the mistake, this leader calls it out in a group meeting. That was pretty sloppy, or we can't afford that kind of laziness. They might say they're pushing people to be their best version. They see their bluntness as a form of honesty and integrity. But how does the team experience it? Often as shaming, very unsafe, very unpredictable, and over time people shut down. They share less. They focus on avoiding criticism than on innovation. And the leader's authentic toughness becomes a barrier to psychological safety. Both leaders in these two cases, they understand authenticity, but it's a very narrow perception that we've already covered. The first thing's that authenticity means never stepping into discomfort of authority. And the second one thinks, well, authority means giving themselves permission to be very harsh. Neither is practicing true authentic leadership. So if you were coaching these leaders, what would you ask them? So for one leader, we can say, what values are you trying to live? Maybe they value connection, humility, being down to earth, and those are good values. Then what you're going to do is you're going to explore how can you honor those values while you also honor your responsibility to give clear, honest feedback. What would it look like to be both kind and honest instead of choosing one? Now, for leader 2, what you can ask is, hey, what values are you trying to live out by being brutally honest? So maybe the value is truth, accountability, excellence. Great. Those are great. Then what you can do is say, how might the way you're expressing that value be landing on others? Is there a way to uphold truth and standards without cutting people down? Where is the line between candor and cruelty? So in both cases, the work is separate. The value from the rigid behavior, all of that. Like you can keep the value and change the behavior. That's the difference between I'm just being myself versus I'm committed to leading well. Even if we talk about moral and ethical authenticity, walking your talk, let's add another layer here, right? It's not enough to feel authentic. Plenty of people feel very real while doing real harm. Ethical authenticity means your actions actually align with your values that you say you hold. There's a congruence between your stated principles and your real behavior. So if you say you value respect, but you routinely interrupt people, you belittle them, you dismiss their input, that's not authentic leadership, right? That's just branding. So if you say you value transparency, let's say, but your team finds out about major changes through rumors, last minute announcement, that's not authentic leadership. If you say you value inclusion, but same voices dominate every meeting, and you never seek out different perspectives, that's not authentic leadership. That's just wishful thinking. That's just me saying, I am great, and just not practicing greatness. Authentic leaders are not perfect. They're going to miss the mark. They will contradict themselves sometimes. The difference is that they care when they do. They notice the gap and they're willing to repair it. So humility is absolutely central here. Humility in authentic leadership doesn't mean you think poorly of yourself either. What it means is you see yourself accurately. You recognize that your perspectives, they may be limited, that your impact can be different from what you've intended to do, and that you always have more to learn. Humble, authentic leadership, this is what it sounds like. saying things like I was wrong, saying things like I'm sorry for how that landed. I got that decision wrong and here's what I'm going to do differently. You're holding yourself accountable at every angle. When leaders keep their egos in check, authenticity becomes a way to build trust, not a way to justify self-indulgence. So as you think about your own leadership, you have to think about where is the gap between what I say I value and what I actually do. How do I respond when someone points out that gap? Am I going to get defensive or do I get curious? And most of the time when you get defensive, you know what? It's because you actually are not doing a really good job of it. Or you're doing a good job of it, but you think of yourself as an extreme. You're on the other side that we talked about. You think you're not worthy. You think you're not good enough. And so when someone calls you out, you get really uncomfortable because in your mind, you're being a worse critic than they are. You also want to think about what might humility look like for you in the next difficult conversation that you have. Think of all of these interactions as a lesson. And your core values matter here. I want you to turn the lens all the way to yourself now. If you had to name your top 3 core values as a leader, what would they be? You heard some of mine today, and my top 5 values. Maybe words like honesty, respect, excellence, compassion, growth, fairness, courage, whatever comes to mind. Choose 3 in your mind right now. And for each of those values, think about how do you express this value through your leadership? And how could this value, if you overdo it or express it without wisdom, could accidentally turn into an authentic leader? If you think about honesty, for instance, if that's one of your core values, if honesty works for you, that's powerful. Honesty, when you're expressing it well, it builds trust. It means people you know where you stand. They can rely on you to tell them the truth. But honesty without tact, it can turn into harshness, like our second leader that we talked about. You use it to justify a lot of unnecessary pain. Authentic leadership asks you to hold honesty together with empathy. And you might say, hey, I'm going to be straightforward with you because I respect you. And I'm going to be really thoughtful in how I say it because I also care about your relationship with me. That's excellent. Think about that. So even something like excellence, since I brought up excellent, came to my mind. Excellence is a value that can be great in driving high standards. You bring more quality to your work, continuous improvement. But without perspective, it can become perfectionism, can it? You might start micromanaging. You criticize everything. You make people feel like nothing is ever good enough. Your value, if it's unbalanced, it becomes a weapon. Or consider compassion. Compassion in the best way can lead to patience, support, and understanding. But without boundaries, you're enabling or avoiding. You might excuse chronic underperformance because you don't want to hurt someone's feeling, or you might take other people's work because you feel bad saying no. Value is good. The unbalanced version is not. So the work is really to understand what your values are, how can you live with them in ways that are both true to you and respectful of others, and where does each value have a shadow side? Authenticity is not just about declaring your values, it's about practicing them in a way that is grounded, skillful, and relational. So all of this means nothing if we don't have a leadership plan, right? We care about the leadership plan. So as we wrap up this episode, I want to set you up for success. How about that? With a reflective assignment that's going to carry you forward. Think of this as a brief charter for how you want to show up as a leader, something you can revisit at the end of a course that we have together today. Okay? Your core values are important. So who are you at your best? What do you stand for? What are your top 3 core values? That's number 1. Number 2, how will you communicate and act on those values with authenticity? So describe what these values look like in your behavior. If you value respect, what does that look like in a meeting? If you value courage, what does that look like in a one-to-one? And then 3, potential pitfalls. So for each of those values, name at least one way it could be misused or come across poorly. So if I overdo candor, I can be harsh. If I overdo compassion, I can risk avoiding necessary conflicts, right? And if I overdo value of excellence, I risk burning myself and my team out. So this is where humility shows up. You're acknowledging that even your strengths have edges. One of my favorite things to say is your blessing is your curse. So how will you remain authentic, true to who you are, but also open-minded, humble, and sensitive to others? Maybe that means you check in with a trusted colleagues about how your style is landing. You practice a brief pause before your difficult conversations to regulate yourself. You may be trying out a new behavior that initially feels uncomfortable, but it is aligned with the leader you want to be. Being willing to adapt to your story, to update your narrative about who you are as a leader is very powerful. You might also build in practices of transparency plus empathy. I want to be transparent with you about what's changing. And I also want to hear how this is affecting you. Do you hear that how powerful that is? You're also giving the freedom to be heard. This is authentic leadership in action. When you put this plan on paper, you are not locking yourself in a rigid identity. You are creating a living document that you can revisit, revise, and deepen as you gain experience. It becomes a touchstone that you can come back to in your next role, next promotion. So as we close this episode, the bottom line is authenticity is not an excuse for hubrism. It is not a free pass to be blunt, rigid, or self-centered. It is anchored in your values, expressed with humility, open to feedback, and it's ever evolving. So be real, but also be kind. Be open, be willing to grow. That is what being real looks like in leadership. Thank you for spending time with me. Take what we talked about today in your own reflection, because that's what matters the most, is our perception of the world that makes a difference as leaders. And what we apply in our behavior matters the most. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. If you want to learn more about me, go to invivoleadershipstrategies.com. I am on LinkedIn. Live your life in vivo, and I'll talk to you soon.